Good afternoon, Luang Por.
Good afternoon, Ajahn Sumedho.
I'm very happy you are willing to do another Q&A. So there's this topic that you have talked about often. I was wondering if you could talk about it as if from scratch, imagining the audience has never heard about this. That is the exercise that you have used to so much benefit, which you call intentionally thinking and noticing the gaps between the thoughts. What is that exercise and what are the benefits?
Well, it's very simple because you're in the witness position and your intention is to notice when you stop thinking, how thinking ceases. And you might intellectually understand that thinking is impermanent, but we tend to be so conditioned to think. We are not used to, accustomed to observing the space between the thoughts, because there is, a word is very limited. Just like the pronoun, personal pronoun I, is just one letter. So you think I, and then there's nothing, there's just silence, space. And you're interested in that, your interest is in the space and the silence, rather than in the meaning of the words. So to do this, I found I would intentionally think, because just trying to stop thinking I found impossible, just as a willful act, that I was going to make myself stop thinking. I couldn't do it. I could kind of like holding your breath for a few seconds, but you can't really sustain that. And then, so I think I am a human being, which is a kind of taken for granted identity. But I know that already, it's part of the conditioning, how I've been educated. So start questioning the meaning of the words. The words don't really count, but the spaces between I and am, or A, am, and then silent. A, just one letter, beginning of the alphabet. And then there's silence. Just being the witness to just thinking, A. And it doesn't matter what you add after that. A good human being, a bad human being. We're not interested in you as a personality, as with qualities of goodness or badness, but just in the space between the words. So I am a human being is a kind of exercise. And after you thought being, if you don't start thinking, there's just silence. And you're tuning into silence that is natural. You don't create it. It's just a part of the life of all of us. But we don't notice it because we tend to think and want to intellectually explain everything. Like, how can you explain silence? Is it, you can, there's no noises or things like that. You just, but, your mind's still thinking. And your mind is not silent, it produces words. So I would think, like my personality, what I think about myself as a person, as a human being, but I'm not interested in the adjectives or the nouns or the descriptions of me as a person, but in the silence between the words. And you meditate on that, you concentrate on silence. The words can be nonsense, they don't even have to make sense. They can be profound or stupid. It's not a matter of judging the words. You're not interested in what words you're thinking, but in the silence that surrounds them, the background where words can appear and disappear.
How did you come up with this exercise? Why was it useful to develop this?
Well, I had an insight early on in my meditation that I had to stop thinking. I had this while I was a Samanera, and I had, after some experiences of meditating, I have to stop thinking. So I tried stopping thinking. And as I said before, I couldn't do it. I mean, I could intentionally stop thinking, but I couldn't sustain, because it was based on me as a person trying to not think as something I'm doing. But so the intention was to stop thinking. And that's all I had the insight, and I had to stop thinking. But how do you stop thinking? And by thinking about stopping thinking, you're still thinking. And feeling compelled to stop thinking, you're still thinking. And who is it that has to stop thinking? Is it Sumedho has to stop thinking, or me? I have to, if I'm going to become enlightened, I have to stop thinking. And so then the first three fetters began to make sense, like the ego. I began to just listen to the ego, this sense of me. I'd listen, I'd say, intentionally think me, and I felt this intense kind of sense of me as a person. I mean, it always refers to your personality, not to the space between the words or the emptiness, the silence around the pronoun me. And you think so much of your life is about me. What do you think of me? How about me? And this simple pronoun, two-letter pronoun, me, resonated as a strong identity with what? With what? With a physical body. This is my body, it's me. And you want to take a picture of me, you have to take a picture of my body. So, just observing, witnessing, exploring how me, ME, affects your emotions. It can be just indifference. Me, I'm not important. Or, what about me? People don't notice me. People misunderstand me. Me. And it's all, when they think of Ajahn Sumedho, they think of a body. a memory that arises, whether they're in front of me or on the other side of the world. So this is like investigation. And just noticing how the pronoun me affects me emotionally. And it's not about the silence, it's about the body, the physical form. And then, you explore that further, that the body is it really what you are, and you've been told it's you, ever since you were born. Your mother and father tell you you're a boy or a girl or whatever, and so you form a sense of identity with your body because you can actually see your own body. And this realm, the samsara, is about bodies. It's not about, the silence or the space that bodies manifest in. It's about me as a person becoming educated about whether I'm a good student or a bad student, or whether I'm approved of or liked, or whether people don't like me, or on and on like that. The whole scenario of a lifespan can be just about me as a physical form and me as a personality. And your personality forms around this sense of me and mine. But if you have good parents who love you and give you a sense of being acceptable or lovable or good, that affects your whole life. And if your parents abuse you, that affects your whole life. Because you're in the delusion that you are what you've been told or what you believe in the form world of concepts, of nouns, adjectives, of beliefs. And they're all conditioned, they're phenomena. They're not the silence behind the condition. And the point of the silence between the words is simple exercise in just the silence you don't create. Me arises in the silence, but also goes back. If you intentionally think me, in a brief moment, it's gone. Me is no longer. It's back to the silence. The silence is what you're interested in, not in the trying to prove that you're worthy of respect, or you're not worthy, or you feel guilty about things you've done in the past, or your tendency to worry and about the future, because this silence has no future and no past. It's totally impersonal. And you're aware of that. You become aware of not being a person, rather than always trying to figure out what kind of person am I, or trying to not be a person. Like, how can a person try not to be a person? Because that's very personal. But if you see like the first fetter, the ego, the sakyaditi, then that's its own sense of, you used to have to think to become a Ajahn Sumedho. You have to, when you're not thinking, I am Ajahn Sumedho, then there's silence. And you're interested in the silence. You're not trying to discuss whether your true nature is Ajahn Sumedho or it's something else. You don't care about that anymore. It's just, this is what the practice, the simple practice of awareness of space between thoughts, is a way of realizing the emptiness of thoughts. That the thoughts are, are discriminations. Male, female, that's a discrimination. And then we have identity, conditioned identity with being male or female, and we operate from that. Men are like this, women are like that. Boys wear blue, girls wear pink. It's part of a cultural conditioning. It's not reality. But what is real is silence. It's because you don't create it, and it's impersonal, and you begin to really appreciate that. Not being a person, not having to be caught in the illusions you've acquired throughout your life anymore, but seeing through them. Seeing the illusions you create around the world you live in, the people you live with, the society that you're in. You listen to the news, and it's all about personalities. People who, whether they're good or bad or scum or scumbags or dirtbags or saints, bodhisattvas, Buddhas, or even the belief that nothing exists. We can believe that we're just empty phenomena as a person because the Buddha said so. But, am I just empty phenomena as a person? No. My personality, after all these years of meditation, still operates. It doesn't necessarily change. But it's not that I've gotten rid of my personality. I have no more, personality. I'm totally empty phenomena. There's another belief that I can operate from, and pretending I'm an enlightened person. But the personality never gets enlightened. It can't. It's words. It's descriptions of good and bad, right and wrong. But right and wrong arise and cease in the here and now. I'm absolutely right is a sentence, that you investigate. I'm right, you're wrong. But no longer, are you operating from trying to defend that position, but the space between I and am and right and you're wrong. And so suddenly all your kind of stubborn beliefs, grasping of views, opinions, no longer, you don't want to be that way anymore, because you see how painful it is to always have to be right or be critical of others because they have things you don't like about them. So right and wrong, right arises when you think right, then you play I am right is like this. But the interest is in the space between the words, not in trying to think more about how right you are and how wrong everyone else is. And then the ego has to operate according to its habits. But if you see that the ego is just attachment to views and opinions, to judgments, to words, concepts, beliefs, that behind all the concepts, views and beliefs and criticisms is silence. And it's pure. It's not beautiful or ugly or good or bad, but it's here and now. And this you realize for yourself through this. I found very effective in dealing with a person that's very self-critical, because my personality is quite critical of myself. And so, and then you hear about you should love yourself. And then try to do that. Because that sounds very nice. You must learn to love yourself. What self do you love? What is self? And what self do you dislike or hate? Where is it? And then you can start thinking about it and analyzing, spending years in psychotherapy trying to figure out why you have all these psychological problems. But when you do this simple reflective meditation on the space and the space between words, because space is here and now. It's not something you create. And words like God or Buddha, Brahma, Krishna, Shiva, these are gods, that we might believe in and we might not believe in. So if I say I don't believe in God, what is it that doesn't believe in God? And when I abide in the space, there's nobody there to believe or disbelieve. But then I've been told, brought up as a Christian, I absolutely must believe in God. First commandment. And who is it that believes in God, And you're trained that when you're from a Christian family, when you just believe what you're told. You don't question it. You don't say, well, what do you mean by God? That comes later in your more discriminative years, rebellious years. But when you're just 3 or 4 or 5 years old, God is the Holy Father, your Savior, your Creator of the world. All these, beautiful titles, and you must love Him, then it's always a male. God is a male. And so, who's loving Him? But what is apparent here and now is the space between the words. The words can change from best to worst. But the space is pure and it's conscious awareness. It's not, you kind of go into a trance and don't notice anything. It's just the simple reality of existing in a form that you're using as a way of understanding ultimate reality or Dhamma. absolute reality. So if I say you must believe in absolute reality, what do you mean by that? Imagine 5 years old, you're told you must believe in absolute reality. It's easier to believe in Ganesha or Krishna or God the Father, or things like that, because they're forms, and you can imagine them. Like Krishna had, beautiful from Shiva in the circle of fire is one of the most beautiful images created. And so Buddha Rupas, like this Buddha Rupa is an image. And so it's, you say Buddha is like this. So you look at a Buddha Rupa and you hold that as your image of Buddha, rather than Buddha means awaken to reality, to Dhamma. It's not an image.
In the exercise of thinking intentionally as you described it, there's this first step when you learn to pay attention to the silence, the gap between the thoughts and the words, which you were saying we don't usually even notice. Then you start noticing them, and you get perspective on the words from the silence. How did you train yourself to abide in that silence? One thing is going back to it, and then how do you train yourself just to stay with it?
Well, like meditation, we all want silence. We go into the temple and we don't want a lot of noise. So silence is something we personally want. If you're interested in meditation, you don't go to the middle of London to find silence. You don't meditate at Trafalgar Square. You don't sit there and just demand silence from a noisy city. But, we're so used to noise. Like people constantly are listening to the radio or television, or they have the earphones and listening to sounds, to music, his own way of what we're conditioned, they become habitual. And then, just like the insight, I have to stop thinking, was an insight. But then the challenge was, how do you do that? How do I stop thinking as a person? And they have to re-examine the sense of I am, me and mine. And then, like living in Thailand for so many years, where you're learning another language, you're thinking in Thai. And you form the same habits in any language you learn, because that's what you're used to. But English is my native tongue, so that's what I was educated in English. So it's what you mainly operate from, thinking in English. But English is an acquired. I wasn't born speaking English. And then I was interested in psychology and philosophy, in religion, interested in Buddhism, interested in Advaita, Vedanta. For a while, years ago, I joined the Self-Realization Society in Los Angeles. I wanted to, I had intentions to realize myself, but it was all about thinking and reading books. And in that year I spent as a samanera where I was alone, I didn't have any books except the Word of the Buddha, Jnanatiloka's treatise. And so I used to read that over and over because that's what gave me something to do. But then I had the insight during that year to stop thinking. And I remember in that year I went to Vientiane across the river from Nong Khai in Laos. And I met some person I knew, and I told him what I was doing. And he said, "Did you get any insight?" I said, "Yes, I have to stop thinking." And he looked at me and walked away. And I thought, that sounds impossible, to stop thinking. Especially if you're intellectual or you like to think. Because I like thinking. But thinking is about philosophy or psychology or self-realization. I became interested in Aurobindo, the Indian saint. I corresponded with their group in India. And, so I was interested in Eastern philosophy, in Zen Buddhism. But it was, the thinking was around, like with D.T. Suzuki's books on Buddhism, Zen Buddhism. I used to, as I started reprinting D.T. Suzuki's books in paperback edition in the 1950s, I used to just get high reading words of D.T. Suzuki about Zen Buddhism. But then I got the impression that with Zen you had to sit for hours in front of a blank wall. And I tried doing that, and I just couldn't stop thinking. What's next? What do I do next? And I just plain white wall. What am I supposed to do with that? And so what am I supposed to do? So the thinking process, I began to, rather than trying to stop it, to think, why not think intentionally? Because my thinking, like what sitting in lotus posture, contemplating a white wall, is trying to stop thinking. And there's nothing, the white walls doesn't have any, it's not very interesting. But the idea that I had to stop thinking was resonating in my mind as what I must, MUST, must do to get enlightened. And that's where exploring the ego.
May I come back to, so then when you discover the silence between the thoughts, could you describe it as pure, being neither pleasurable nor painful or anything like that. So it doesn't have really a characteristic you can latch onto. And thoughts are so much more attractive and fascinating than silence because they're full of characteristics, make us feel. So when you discover the fact that silence gives you perspective on thinking and gives you a break from thinking, you can stay there for a bit, and then the habit in the mind is to slowly drift back towards thinking. How do you cultivate that ability to stay with the silence? And
well, silence isn't interesting,
right.
but it's here and now. And then I use conundrums to question it. At first it's boring because you expect the enlightenment to be interesting. Talk about when Buddha became enlightened, the world shook, and you think, am I just nothing? Am I just silence? And it's perfect. And you start listening to the sense of yourself thinking about how boring silence is. And then you realize you're creating those words. Is silence really boring? And as I cultivated the silence, then I found it blissful. Because the word bliss was not what I thought that was like getting high. But actually, when they talk about, like in Vedanta, they talk about bliss, they're talking about silence, where there's no self. And you realize in silence, you're aware, but you're not thinking, you're still conscious. And where you can reflect on this silence is like this, and learning to just cultivate that, seek it out, develop it, because it works wherever you are, whether you're in the middle of London or in a silent place in the world, in a sensory deprivation tank. Like years ago, people were going to places where they could, called sensory deprivation situations, where the senses are completely denied contact. But that was very controlled. You called it sensory deprivation tank. So once you kind of relax into that, it's blissful. But once you get out of the tank, then you're back into noisy London. So you're still operating from depriving yourself of sensory contact. I'm not going to eat any food. I'm not going to listen to the radio. I'm not going to watch TV. I'm not going to read books. I'm going to deprive my senses of their pleasures. Is still, who's doing that? The sense of I must deprive myself, discipline myself, control myself, is still ego, sakya ditti. Because who has to control what? Can my personality really control my desires? They can make judgments about them, like greedy or subtle or gross, or these are words that define, they give description of desire, but desire itself, this is a desire realm. That's where recognizing the realm that we're experiencing through the forms, through the senses, is all about desire. Desire in its forms of wanting sensory pleasures and not wanting sensory pleasures. Desire to become something. How many people say they're not enlightened after many years of meditation? So they're still thinking that they're, as a person, going to get enlightened. But as I've said many times before, the person never gets enlightened. The personality can't do it because it's built out of illusion and desire, conditioning. But what isn't desire, which is desireless, is the silence, conscious awareness, silence, which is here all the time, whether you're in the middle of London or in a sensory deprivation tank or in a silent kuti with everything under control.
So as this silence becomes the position from which you can witness the arising and ceasing of thoughts, you seem to indicate you can also witness the arising and ceasing of personality, of emotions, basically of every sankhara, isn't it?
Like your personality is thoughts. Like when you're born, you don't have a personality. And, then that develops as you get conditioned. You have human form, but you're not thinking, I'm a form, I'm a person, I'm a boy or girl. You're told that later. But the personality is form, definitely. Like my personality is a form that I've developed over the years. Not intentionally, it just happens to be like this. Through the karma of my parents, of being born through their genes and acquiring the characteristics that come through that. And then the kind of family I grew up in, the society, all conditioned. But the silence is something that we don't notice until we begin to, some people notice it very quickly, but they're rare. Most of us are caught in the momentum of conditioning. And the personality is an artificial thing. It's not a real person. That's why it can't become enlightened. Like the Buddha, as a personality, was he Prince Siddhartha? Was he Gautama the ascetic? No, the Buddha means awakened consciousness, a pure conscious awareness. He still had a form, a male form, and lived many years after enlightenment. The body, his personality was no longer his identity.
So I have a question. Does that exercise of noticing the gap between the words leads to noticing the silence? Does that also lead to this noticing of this position of the witness, the pure consciousness?
Yeah. It's direct. You don't know what it is at first, like referring to the sound of silence. I didn't know what it was. But my insight was, I had insight through it, that it was always here and now. Whether I was aware of it as a person would change according to conditions. So, after years, that was like years ago, 59 years ago, when I was in Samanera. And I lived a profound insight into even though I didn't develop this investigation of words then, but I had a sense of direction. And I tried to find references to it, and because I don't remember anybody mentioning it in the Buddhist world. Because there's nothing you can really talk about. So like ordaining as a bhikkhu, then you've got to learn precepts and chants and conform to rules and precepts in a way that I knew was, I had insight into the value of that this would help. And then in Thailand, for example, in forest monasteries, a lot of noise. There are a lot of cicadas and mosquitoes and flies, and jungles are not particularly silent. So I kind of dismissed that, but it kept coming back to me, the silence. Like once you notice it, you might forget it, and because it's natural, it's not like a memory. Silence is not a memory. And over the years, just the simple life of a bhikkhu, the silence becomes stronger. It becomes much more here and now as you live your life as a Buddhist monk. So even people ask me if I ever wanted to disrobe, and I can't say I ever wanted to. Because I respected the form that is established in the Thai forest tradition. It was worthy of respect. Even though it wasn't easy. And, you went through a lot of love-hate relationships with the whole form. But you realize that that's not the point about just following what I like or in the moment what pleases me, but, learning to use the discomforts, the irritations, the boredom, as a way of reflecting. Because boredom is a condition, it's a phenomenon. It's not permanent. So then through this, listening to the silence between words, all the language, beliefs, and conditioning, I had suddenly, realized letting go of them. everything. That whatever I believe is still a belief. It's a form that it may be a beautiful form or a true form, but belief is form. You know, we believe in God or don't believe in God, it's still a form that arises and ceases. What doesn't arise and cease is the silence. And that's what I abide in. Because I know that disrobing would create even more problems. And that life as a layperson, you know, is about suffering and me and mine and getting work and relationships with others and getting married, having a family, planning for the future, feeling guilty about the imperfections of your past. You realize it's all phenomena that emanates, arises, ceases, and its cessation is peace. That's Third Noble Truth, which is Nirodha. The Pali word Nirodha means the end of suffering. So in the silence, there's no suffering.
Thank you for these reflections.